Today, I am here with Dr. Mary Donohue, who leads Digital Wellness Center. And we are going to be talking about the way how their work in the organization can help to reduce gambling-related harm, but also to move the responsible gambling into an industry which is more accepted by the players. And we will be talking about how micro breaks can affect it, different kind of them, and how it can influence the decision-making of the players. Hi, Mary. It's great to have you with us today. I'm so excited about our conversation. So I think we can jump to it straight away. So I'm going to ask you about the work within the Digital Wellness Center that you are doing, to tell me more about that. And also to emphasize what is the secret sauce for reduction of gambling-related harm in regards to players and their well-being.
Let me start with the end, and then I'll go to the beginning.
Okay.
The secret sauce is science. We use data. We don't use opinion. And our data is based in 3 areas of science. The fairly new area of digital psychology, what we call generational anchoring benchmarks. And I wrote about that in my book, Message Received, a couple of years ago, bestseller, and behavior modification. And all those 3 things work together to create a Venn diagram. And in the middle of that Venn diagram, where all 3 circles meet, is safer gambling behavior. We're like the water between beers when you're drinking responsibly.
Yeah.
But we want to do it naturally so that it makes sense to the player, but also to the regulator and to the operator.
I like the analogy with drinking water in between beers. Yeah. But in order for that to work, you will need a person to understand that they should drink a water in between beers.
That's where the science comes in. None of us want to be nannied. None of us want to be told what to do. It seems to go against our very nature as adults. What we do is engage people with something everyone's interested in, themselves. And so we use micro breaks that were created in the 1980s at Purdue. And it was originally designed for workplace health and safety. And you can go back and read the studies about them. And they failed initially. Like all good science, they failed. But there was an aha moment, which was, hey, when people were doing this, their heart rate slowed down. Their breathing slowed down. And it was that physiological response that began to help people realize that when you help people and capture their imagination, it relaxes them without saying, all right, let's do a meditation now, or let's take a break, or you need to take a break.
Yeah.
Micro breaks were designed to give people an immediate break because they wanted to take it. And we've carried on with that research.
It sounds completely different than the, I would say, mainstream approach into reduction of gambling harm, basically stopping people from doing something in a way like now you are spending more than you should and you need to do something with it. I feel like it's quite opposite, right? Because this doesn't have to necessarily land well telling something like this to a person.
It doesn't land well.
Yeah.
And we can see that. But this is where we need to go back to the data. Less than, I believe it is 2% of the population are using responsible gaming tools right now, if we just cut to the chase. And what we want to do is increase that to 97%.
Wow.
And to do that, you have to be fun. You have to be competitive. You have to be entertainment. And that's what we design. And they're designed based on certified, scientific, neurological practices that draw people in by their own desire versus saying to someone, you're naughty. You've made a bad bet. Well, duh. I know that. Thank you. I mean, I've seen my brother throw his phone across the room. Like somebody says that to him, or these are your markers, or all these different things. And we don't want to do that. We want to help all gamblers enjoy, but enjoy responsibly. And to do that, just take little time out. Think of gambling like being on a treadmill. You're running And when you start, your heart rate's slow and you're making good decisions. The more you run, the faster you go, the more incline. Your heart, your breathing, you start to sweat. It's very much like when you've made a bad bet. The physiology is the same. What we do is just say, okay, wait, pause, and do this. So you're stretching versus just standing on the treadmill. Yeah. And that's what we're doing right now, is stopping the treadmill so suddenly people don't know what to do. You're rolling backwards.
Indeed.
We just bring it down and then take it up. Bring it down. And if you want, take it up, or you can get off.
So it's like this tunnel vision when you are too much into training. So I remember it from the hockey games, when basically you are too long on ice. You need to get out because you are not able to see the stuff around you, just this tunnel vision.
100%. You've named it.
Yeah. And we're going to get deeper into what these micro breaks can be and how does it look like. But I wanted to catch up on, you mentioned your brother. Yes. And I know that there is a story in connection with your brother, basically what brought you into gambling. Can you tell me a bit more about that?
Sure. My brother was at our home, and it was during football. Lots and lots of it. American Thanksgiving is a lot of football. I swear that's what the event is about, is football, not turkey. Yeah. And my brother is utterly charming, a wonderful man, and great uncle to my daughter and to his other niece and nephew. Always fun. And all of a sudden, both my husband and I noticed he was being very curt to our daughter. And his position changed. And he started almost rocking back and forth. And eventually you could almost see his heart coming out of his chest. And then it was like steam was coming out of his ears.
Something is happening.
What's going on? Yeah. And as a scientist, you think, wait, what? What is this? As a sister, you're like, oh my God, my brother, what can I do? And it was that, oh my God moment where I just thought, what the heck happened to you? And eventually what it was is he had bet an inordinate amount of money on the kick of a football.
On a kick?
A kick.
Like a micro.
The final kick.
Okay.
And so he had to wait. And then that kick turned into a parlay. And then that parlay turned into something else. And by the end of it, it was a lot of money. And by a lot, I mean months worth of mortgage amount of money. And, he finally told us this. And I had been developing something for Microsoft and American Airlines, and it was using micro breaks. And I didn't know what else to do, but I wanted him to calm down. And I knew this calmed people down. And I said, hey, do me a favor and test what I'm doing. And he did. And the response was immediate. He relaxed. He put down the phone. He, stopped drinking his beer as quickly, and he became my brother again. And I was like, what the heck is going on? So I reached out to a friend of mine, Paul Burns, who runs the Canadian Gaming Association. Yeah. And we began to look at this idea of, I said, like his dopamine, like his mind, it was crazy. And how do we stop it? And it was micro breaks that allow the brain to modulate. It allows the chemicals, the dopamine in your brain to modulate. And so we started looking at the application of this in gambling. And it took a couple years, like all good science. And it was at that moment that we said, we have something here. And that's how it started.
It's funny that you mentioned dopamine, because now we understand that addiction is very much connected with the dopamine release in the brains and how it works. And I feel like this dopamine cycles and what it makes, and I mean, what does it do with people? It's becoming more and more popular in connection with social media and how to manage your dopamine. And I feel like it is also like there is an opportunity for this to be applied in gambling, that people would understand it, because it's different when they would understand the cycle, they would understand how it works from things like social media or other areas, and then apply to gambling. And I also feel like it can give them the right explanation that they want or need to have. Because I feel like for many people, they wouldn't be denying that they would have some sort of a problem, because they would feel like if I would accept that something is happening, which I'm failing to control, I might be labeled as having a problem, to be part of that group, which I do not want to be part of. But when you sort of normalize it through these dopamine cycles, it feels like it could be a way forward for, I would say, like overall decrease of gambling harm, and not by the action of the operators or regulators, but by the actions of the players themselves.
Self-regulation. And that's exactly, and we're not talking just about people with problems. My brother doesn't have a problem. My brother still gambles. My brother made a bad decision.
Yeah.
And if I was to go back and help you understand how we came to that discovery and what was dependent on it, it was his mood. And this is something we're not factoring into gambling because we're on someone's phone.
Yeah.
What else has happened? Have they had a bad day? Have they had a good day? And if you look at whether we're using our Droodle games, if we're using our binaural beats, if we're using our quizzes, everything is designed based on the language, your generation, and the outcome we want to see. And the outcome is that you're in a better mood.
Yeah.
So when we originally did our first test, and we didn't run the test, a university ran it in Europe, and we found that in less than 3 minutes, 44% in the audience went from stressed to happy. 44%. That means we work faster than any drug on the market to change your mood. And why is that important? So I'm going to ask you a question. And when you are angry, do you make a good decision?
No, I think not. But the problem is that I think I am doing good decisions.
Of course you are.
That's the problem. It's like, I want to do it because it's the right. But then in the aftermath, I see that I have made a bad decision at that time.
You know how you can really easily check it? A fight with your spouse or your partner or your kids. Your anger, or if you're depressed, you say things you really didn't mean, but you were taking their anger out, or you were frustrated, and that's what happened to my brother.
Yeah.
Our father had just died. It was just COVID. So there was only a few of us. We're used to having 40 together for dinner. It was 4.
Yeah.
And it was a horribly depressing time. And so that drove bad decisions. Now, as you were talking about earlier, if I had had a little pop-up that said, hey, you're betting high, is your dopamine high? Check it out. What would happen? Well, of course you'd check it out. You'd be like, oh, wait, okay. And sometimes I wish that was, when I'm having a disagreement with my husband, I want to make sure, I wish I had that pop up in my brain.
Exactly. And when you speak about it, what it makes me think is the stuff that people do, that they use gambling, and not only gambling, but other forms or other activities as a coping mechanism to stress or to a depression. It kind of fits very well into what you've just described. And I can feel it also on myself. So I would gamble from time to time, just to put a few euros or something, just to see if I'm lucky. And I've experienced a period of time when I was frustrated, when I was looking for something to feeling better, I would think about gambling. Just to put in the 15, 20 euros and to spin it. And perhaps if I will change it to doing a Droodle or to do something else, which would be, let's say, a healthier coping mechanism, because I wouldn't be able to make good choices when I'm gambling at that state. It's like one of the basic or fundamental advice is that you shouldn't be gambling when you are drinking. You shouldn't be gambling when you are feeling distressed. Perhaps that could be the better way how to get out of that negative feelings and then make a right decision.
Well, one of the things we do is we gamify it so you can win prizes. So you still get that good feeling. Everything we do is based on positive psychology from that standpoint. When we look at digital psychologies, there's a ton of different definitions, but we use your brain on digital. And our brains aren't used to digital. since the advent of the smartphone, 2007, is really when our brains have had to process information.
Yeah, it's not that long when you compare with all the years before that.
And there's no tone. So if you're in a casino, there's loud noises, there's visuals all over the place. There's that sitting beside someone when you're playing blackjack, like you're playing against them, and you're playing against a dealer and you can watch their face. You can understand the physical cues. Yeah. But when you're playing it online, are there any cues? No. For poker, it's the same strategy. For blackjack, it's a similar strategy. But, what are your cues to sort of stop and say, wait, what? So we want to be those cues.
So help me understand how it can look like in reality. So for example, I am placing bets and I have placed several bets in a row. I might feel distressed, but it wouldn't be that obvious because, I'm just clicking to a phone, but there is some data, there is something that is going on, something that shows the operator. So how these breaks could be implemented in order to deliver the change?
We could have a pop-up. We could start you off with a break if you so choose. So what people always like is a good baseline. So on promotions page for digital gambling operators, you could simply put, hey, measure your dopamine, check your knowledge. You feel good. Is your luck running the same? And people can click it. And so what we do is we give people points for right answers, and we make things pretty clean. And so they can process through this and they go through it quickly. And we anticipate people to use it for 3 to 5 minutes. That's what we want to see. Yeah. But we also see people using it for up to 10 minutes. And that's typically when they're very, very, very stressed or they're very depressed, when they're on either ends of the spectrum. And that can easily be just a link. How you feeling? Have a check-in, any of those things. What we have to look at is the customer journey. Yeah. And where in the customer journey does it make sense? Does it make sense to level set? Most times, yes. Especially if you can win a fun prize or get some points. Just trying your luck with us first. Does it make sense after what you said? You've placed a lot of bets. Yes. Does it make sense when you have been online for an hour? Yes. So here's a real use case example. One of the things that puzzled me the most recently was in a trial. We have a game called Pairs, and it can be very frustrating. We give you a clue and then we say, match the pairs. And obviously that's your job. Yeah. So the clue could be what's brown and black and used in sports. Well, clearly a basketball. Yeah. But what else goes with a basketball? So you have to figure out what the pair is. And if you don't get it, you don't get the right answer right away. We were seeing people on that puzzle for 19 minutes. And in my mind, that's a huge failure. What's going on? Why are they doing this? This is too long. Or what we finally figured out is they would open the puzzle. They would think about the puzzle. They'd go do something else and they'd come back to the puzzle. They'd think about the puzzle. Then they'd come back. That's exactly what we want. They're self-regulating. Yes. They're off, they're back, they're off, they're back. And then when we see people, they like going on our leaderboard and checking out where they are. Now, we don't collect any personal information. If the operators can do that, that's great. They're following GDPR. But for we like aggregate data. So what is the mood of people? And it's very interesting to see their moods when they come back from playing. They're happy, they're content, they're playing. And yes, sometimes they will play for shorter periods of time. But we know, because we measure the Net Promoter Score, the NPS score, that they trust the brand, so they go back. Right. And that's what we want to start seeing, is building this trust in the same way you have your favorite food or your favorite shoes or your favorite wine. It's because you like it and you trust it. You know nothing's going to happen.
Exactly. You know what I'm experiencing, or what I've experienced, but I think like it's the case for at least a certain group of the operators, that they feel to be afraid to engage with their players about anything else than promotions, bonuses, things that are directly connected with their gambling. And what they are saying, like, we don't want to do that because our players are not, they don't want to hear it. They won't just hear it about gambling, promotions, and bonuses. And they feel like it's going to be intrusive into their intention. But I feel like it's a false assumption because customers are generally happy when someone takes care of them. From what you're saying, and also how I basically see it, it's just about the change of the type of communication. You will probably get a negative reaction when you're gonna basically tell someone like, you are spending too much, you need to take a break. But if you change the narrative and if you speak in a different manner,
that's 100% right.
That it's gonna make a huge change.
Yep. And what you say there is key. And I've started to talk to people more about this. You feel. Well, that's fantastic. What is your feeling based on? Our data is based on 34,000 people. That's a lot of people.
Yeah.
It's not as many as I'd like, but it's a lot of people. And so you need to start trying because right now you're bleeding customers. That's costly. And so if we look at it from a cost management perspective, let me put my CEO hat on for a few minutes and just say, that's a big waste of money to feel that way. How are you going to use the data to begin to build a customer journey that creates sustainable customer behavior?
I feel like it's more about the afraid of the change of the status quo. I think that gambling companies have benefited for many years from the narrative that customers do not need to know much, that it is comfortable for them, the operators, that the customers are being just fluxed in the slot machines and stuff that happens over there. And I feel like this is changing, not only because of the regulation, but also because of the, I would call it the evolution of gambling, because now we know more from the scientific point of view. And also we understand how we can go further with the gambling industry in order to be less harmful and more fun. And the point that I'm trying to make, I completely forgot. Okay, we'll cut this off. But they were afraid
of the change, and companies have benefited from this assumption that they don't need to care for customers.
Yes, and I feel like that is changing. And I feel like there is currently not much incentive for the ones which are not being required to do it, which are not enforced by regulation or something to do it. But more and more, with more and more basically results, like the research that you've did, I think that this could slowly change. And also for the ones who are not obliged to do it by regulation, their perception could change and they could start to engage with it. And I remember you mentioned a figure recently, which was about the retention and acquisition of new customers. So acquisition is more and more expensive these days. So do you have any data on it?
Well, I didn't create the data. If we look at what Bain is talking about, Deloitte, McKinsey, 22% less client loss if you care for a customer.
Yeah.
22% is a lot of money. And if you look at how you can build trust with a company, with a customer, and we can begin that process in less than 3 minutes, can you afford not to invest? Now let's look at analysts looking at your business. So again, putting my CEO hat on for publicly traded companies, you've got to know that analysts are looking at your customer retention. My husband's a business journalist. The first thing they do is read the annual report and they're like, wow, you're spending a lot on getting new customers. Why?
Right.
And that's one of the things I think they're going to start to wake up to because it is a business.
Yeah.
And I think when we talk about responsible gaming, we need to think about it as a business. And it's interesting because you've been in the industry more than I have. I learned a lot from Flutter. We won the Alpha Hub Award, and Flutter really took me under their wing and said, okay, this is where we're going. This is what we're doing. And this is our Play Well challenge.
Yeah.
And let's be a part of that. And so I really began to look at it from the business perspective of Flutter as well. And that's why, obviously they're investing in it. And if you look at their new CEO, Kevin Harrington, such an ethical man. I had a great pleasure of learning from him as well. When you look at ethics and good business practice, you begin to see a sustainable business that's a form of entertainment versus being classified as, bad gambling practices.
Yeah. Do you feel like the current trend in the industry, and I'm not talking only about the tier 1 regulated companies, is that they want to do a profound change in their protection of the customers? Or is it still in a state that companies would want to sort of like greenwash, to put out initiatives, to put out strategies for responsible gambling, but, not really doing that behind the closed door of the boardroom meeting?
I think that I don't know enough gambling companies to answer that based on any data. I can only speak to what I have experienced.
Yep.
And at the highest level, I have never met a CEO who doesn't want to protect their customer because they're people too. And I have met probably about 3% of the population who does not care, in my experience. And they blow me off super fast. But 97% of the meetings I have had in the course of the last year and a little bit have been, now this is interesting.
Yeah.
Now the question is, how do we afford it? That's a huge shift. But also I am able to speak with some authority on the business value of this. I'm not looking at it as just one. So if you think about it, just one tier, I'm forced to put money in responsible gaming by the regulators. So I'm going to do it. You have to look at the whole business strategy. How is this helping with customer retention? How is this crisis issues management? For example, when something goes south and somebody loses their house, how can you demonstrate you've actually done your job? We can do that. We actually have the data on that from an aggregate standpoint. So if 4,000 people experience this and one person didn't, that's a tragedy. Let's figure out how to avoid that. So these are the kinds of things versus, well, so-and-so didn't call them back and they had put their email in and they had done this and they had done that. And that's the tragedy of responsible gaming.
This is an interesting point because I hear it quite a lot from the operators. They do not know how exactly they should proceed because the regulation is not prescribing it. It's like you should prevent gambling harm, you should do this, you should stop and do that. But the journey or a way how to do it is not completely clear. So they need to figure out something on their own, but even then, they are not 100% sure if that is going to be bought out by the regulator in the time of audit or something. So I think it is very reasonable to have, science-backed procedure that they can do in order to mitigate it and to prevent it.
I think so too. And that's why we're moving forward. But I think what you've just hit on here is, again, crisis issues management with regulators. Do you really want to risk losing your license based on a feeling? No, is usually the answer when you ask the board of directors. And one of the other things that I just wanted to address is, no matter what industry you're in, you're always going to have that 3% that's bad. It doesn't matter if it's crypto, if it's technology.
Sometimes even more. But I think so too. And it relates pretty much to my work with the global self-exclusion, because we've always counted with that there is going to be some space which will be remaining after the creation of global system. You just cannot cover a 100%. So it was one of the issues or one of the contra arguments, why are you doing this? You will be never able to do it 100%. Yeah, we won't, but we will cover at least at 95 or 97%. And those that wouldn't want to join, you could have a very strong assumption that they are those 3% that basically do not want to go into protection. But I feel like the it's very difficult to be aiming for that 100% because you can hardly achieve it. But to provide a value and to provide the coverage for those 95 or 97%, that's still worth it. But I wanted to talk about more regarding the different kind of micro breaks. So you mentioned Doodles, you mentioned those pair games. Yeah. And I know that you've been also working on some questionnaires.
Yes.
So what are the different types of micro breaks, and perhaps even how you decide, or how it is being decided, which one of these micro breaks is, which type would be the right one in the different situations?
Again, let me just start by level setting. 100% of the time, we are never, ever going to work. Mm-hmm. What we are is a seatbelt.
Yes.
And that's what I call it, the seatbelt test. And we're preventative. There's a couple, like 5 big companies out there right now that are amazing at looking at the data and saying, okay, here's a problem. This is what we're going to do. This is, after a problem has occurred. Mm-hmm. And then understanding where the high risks are. Think of us as a seatbelt. Mm-hmm. So you put a seatbelt on when you get in the car. It's not because you think, oh my God, today I'm going to have an accident. It's you put the seatbelt on because you want to be safer if you do have an accident. Mm-hmm. And when I look at a micro break, I don't want to look at a game or a puzzle for the sake of a game or a puzzle. Mm-hmm. I want to look at it as entertainment for your prefrontal lobe that will clear the stress in your prefrontal lobe. So that means there has to be 3 things that work in your brain, that trigger your brain. Mm-hmm. So usually it's understanding if you're stimulated by visual, auditory, or kinesthetic words.
Yeah.
Then we have to understand what the behavior is we want to change. So do we want to change the mood? Do we want to change the mood from content to stressed? And then we have to understand, which sounds crazy, last but not least, where you are, the environment you're in. Mm-hmm. For example, are you in a casino? Are you in a game? Or are we sending this as a preventative email? Or is this just a link on a website? So again, I go back to that Venn diagram and we begin to look at certified wellness content as a seatbelt that protects the player.
Right.
Then we go back in time and we look at stressful times throughout history. You always have to go back to history and look at what worked. Mm-hmm. So when we go back to the 1950s and the big time of the scary bomb, Doodles were developed by a comedian. And for the life of me right this second, I can't remember his name, but I always remember his name. And now I have no memory of his name.
That's fine.
But he couldn't get audiences engaged.
Yes.
Because they were really stressed. Mm-hmm. So he started doing these silly drawings and then telling people what they were. It was kind of like a magic trick. Well, what happens is information's coming into your prefrontal lobe, which is right here. Then your mammalian brain's right here, which is where your gut feelings are. Mm-hmm. And that attaches to your reptilian brain, which is where fight or flight is.
Yes.
The more stressed you are, the more your prefrontal lobe clouds up, shall we say. It fills with clouds and no sunshine can get through. Mm-hmm. And that means your front brain can't talk to your back brain. And that means you get those signs like my brother did, heartbeat, sweating, anger, all of those things. You go into fight or flight. Mm-hmm. What we want to do is clear that. So the best way to do that is to make you smile or to make you, I never knew that. An aha moment.
Yeah. Or even because, sorry, but for me, when we were doing the Doodles together, for me, it was sort of like an argue, right? I mean, what is this on the picture? No, that's a turtle with a hat.
Yeah.
And the Doodle said, no, it's not a turtle with a hat. It's a comedian with a hat, whatever. I was like, okay, wait a minute. No, this is a turtle. And it gets you thinking. And I mean, I felt the impact. I'm not going to lie. We had a call. I think it was sometime in the afternoon because of the time differences. Yeah. And I remember that I was feeling a bit exhausted. And I was able to see, to feel the difference on myself. Like, okay, what did we just do? Because I think the beauty of it was that at the time, I didn't have that much of a background. I didn't have that much of a context. The things that we were discussing, like what happens in your brain. So we just went into, let's play a game, Šimon. I'm going to show you what these little games are about. So I didn't have these like biased feelings, correct, perhaps. And I would just got myself to be driven by the game. And it works. So I assume that the idea is not to explain every detail to players before they engage in it, right?
I don't explain anything. And we have the best time. And do customers use us all the time? No. But the one thing we're most surprised at is people saying they return. They like it. Yeah. They want to play more. And that makes me happy because that means they're self-regulating. They're going out for some exercise. They're eating properly. It's the same principle of good health. If I were to say to you, okay, today you're not having any alcohol because I feel like you drank too much this weekend. Not that I know we're having. Yeah. Well, what would you say to me? Go to hell, Mary. I'm having a glass of wine tonight. Yeah, well, that's what we're doing to people. So instead, I'm like, hey, do you want to go dancing? Do you want to go for a run? Do you want to go for a coffee? And I've totally taken you off this idea of, I'm going to, but I haven't said why, because I'm concerned for your health. I've just said, let's try it.
Yeah. So I understand the micro breaks and all this approach to be falling into a prevention part. But I am sure that prevention does not work for everyone.
No.
So if the micro breaks are not gonna help on the long run, like even though I'm clearing my brain with this, I'm still having these loss of controls. What should come afterwards?
Well, myself, I like the work of Crucial Compliance and Mindway, who can block you. I know Crucial's working on an AI that can automatically stop you from gambling. I'd like to see those in slot machines as well, because when we've done site visits and studies looking at slot machines, you just get into this spell. Nothing, as we talked about earlier, will work 100% for 100% of the people. It would be great if we could have automatic stop. We won't. We haven't stopped people from drinking and driving yet. And my aunt was killed by a drunk driver 50 years ago. And so what else can we do? Well, we can start using AI. And this is where I think the brilliance of AI comes in, because it learns patterns. It can learn individual patterns. And we're working, for example, with Crucial. We're working with Crucial to work on this pattern so that we can give you the right micro break at the right time in the right game, so that then you can make the right decision. And sometimes the right decision is to step away.
So the reason why I'm asking this is these are micro breaks. But what is very popular in the industry and the part of not prevention, but more to the recovery part is the self-exclusion, which you could call a big break. So when I'm listening to you, I feel like, because when you have the self-exclusion, the self part in it is connected that there has to be an intention from the person to do it. It would be similar as to what we discussed before, that if someone is not aligned with the decision that they are not going to be gambling anymore with the brand, they might easily find a different opportunity where to gamble. So would you see a transition from micro breaks into this big break in case that the person is still having difficulties with control?
That's a wonderful idea. When I've talked to gamblers that have gone to things like Gamblers Anonymous and things, they like it because they like playing.
Yeah.
No one has mentioned it in that period. I like that idea very much. Thank you for thinking of it. I think we should think about it.
Yeah, it just sparked from what you were saying, because I feel, I see the micro breaks as a tool, how to establish a communication with the player. different kind of than the type of communication, ordering, saying you shouldn't do that and you shouldn't do that. And then perhaps it's going to bring the opportunity, okay, micro breaks are not working. Perhaps you need a bigger break and to think about some other stuff. And perhaps it might change for you. Perhaps it might not. I mean, still gambling is not for everyone. There is this percentage of people, they wouldn't be able to gamble in a safer way. But I wanted to talk about the recent paper that you are working on it. I'm not sure if it is yet released. And there is some very interesting data. I think it was 4 case studies, which was part of it.
Yes.
I remember one was about generational interest. It was like what is generally important for different generations, Gen Z, Gen X, millennials and boomers. So can you tell me more about this? What else is in it?
Well, what we started looking at was something no one else was doing. And you'll find that a lot in science because you're sitting somewhere and I still do participate in peer review. We're going in February, and that means other, people come together and say that's a dumb idea or that's a great idea. That's all it means. Yeah. But it also means you have to defend your research. And one of the things that people kept asking me in the industry and from my old work, like at Microsoft, at Walmart, American Airlines, was how are different generations responding to AI? And so I began to think about it. And then how are different generations getting stressed on gaming platforms? And then what can we do with AI to calm them down, give them a break? Now, are some of them going to take a break? No, but we can actually give people a micro break in the narratives we use with them. So that's where that research began. And so with Gen Z, we know that they have an attention span of 1.4 seconds, basically. And how do we change, and what language do we use, and what do we do? And so that's what I began to look at. And it became really fun because then you begin from a perspective of gambling, a perspective of safer gambling, of playing well, to begin to understand what's stressing people. And when we look at Gen X, so my generation, it's when you have to go through all of these kinds of forms and upload and do, and it's automatic, you have to do them. So they're going to leave. Yeah. So how do we reduce that stress? And when we look at boomers, sometimes they get the message better when it's a very long message, where if you were to give that to, say, your generation, a millennial or a Gen Z, people would be like, and I'm out. Too long to read. Yeah. But using AI, we can actually detect who's what generation, give them the right message, give them the right break, and that seatbelt clicks right in. And that's an operator's job. An operator's job, any business's job, is to protect your consumer. And that, whether you're in retail, whether you're in gambling, whether you're in hospitality, you can't put your customer at risk. And so that's all we're doing is now helping you identify different generational anchoring benchmarks that will allow your customers to play well.
What would you say to the argument that you cannot generalize a certain generation in a way like this is the way that they like and they don't like?
I think that's a great feeling. But data proves it wrong.
Feelings, right?
Yeah. I hear that all the time. And yes, we're individuals. But as my book demonstrated, many, many chapters, was that each generation processes information differently through technology. And that's the key to understanding safer gambling. Boomers are far more auditory. Gen X are far more visual. Millennials are far more kinesthetic. For example, if you listen back to this tape and you see how many times you use the word I feel versus how many times I use the word see or Can you see? You'll see the difference in generational patterning already. That's how we communicate. And that's based on our mammalian brain, which is how patterns are formed. Where Gen Z is the first generation that grew up in technology. So they're very visual and kinesthetic. And that comes from learning from YouTube. You have to actively search kinesthetic and action, and then visual, watching. So when you're designing games, when you're designing safe gaming strategies, all of these things have to be taken into account. So earlier you asked me when I'm designing a game, these are some of the things I take into account when I'm designing a game.
Talking about designing a game, what role could game designers play in implementing microbreaks?
Oh my God, that's my dream. I would love to be sort of, for lack of a better word, like a movie maker for neuroscience.
Yeah.
And they have such an interesting perspective on having fun. And challenging. And there's a certain group out there of game designers that I think we could really work with. Like, you can't just take any game and make it into a microbreak, because you have to use the neuroscience. Front brain talks to back brain. How do you stimulate that? How do you introduce oxytocin into the brain? What are the key words? What is the behavior mod you want to see? You know, what is the positive psychology? Like, again, that test I told you about, the seatbelt test. But game designers, I could teach them how to do this. And so right now we're trying all kinds of different things, but I'm looking forward to the time when I can have a massive lab. We're launching an actual lab, I think in May or June. Well, we always say May, but to be honest, it'll probably be June. And when you talk about the paper, I didn't want to launch the paper until I talked to you. So we'll launch it tomorrow.
Cool. It's actually a very interesting discussions about game developers, but perhaps I'm going to extend it to other stakeholders in the industry, because mainly we talk about the operators as the ones who should be responsible, the ones that should implement stuff in order to prevent harm. But I think we are forgetting about game developers or even platform providers. I know from my own experience that there are many operators that are limited by the capabilities that are there by the platform providers. And we discussed the game developers. Do you feel like that the tides are shifting towards other stakeholders, realizing that they should play their role into all of this?
100%. Some of the people, so I grew up in television, and so movie makers are starting to reach out. And that's obviously where we want to go with this. We've made some short movies, happy to share them with you, that we'll be using at casinos in a launch in April. Then we look at social media providers. For example, which is funny given it's today, a partnership with TikTok, which is an awesome partnership because they get the value of responsible gaming. Let me give you an example of how that worked. I don't think I talked about that when I was talking about the hint of the paper. But on TikTok, we created a short, silly TikTok where I talk about the neuroscience of your brain and I compare it to an egg. Now, the amount of TikTok followers equals the amount of family members I have that are on TikTok, which is 2.
2, right.
And so all of a sudden, within hours, we had something like 2,400 views and people sharing it. And then it escalated from there. And people were hungry for this content on the platform. So when it's done right, they are choosing the platforms, the social media platforms. So when we talk to game developers, how can we build that in? What is the technology that we can use? And so that's something we're building with TikTok and other social media providers.
It sounds like a great example of basically talking the language of the generation, or perhaps to frame it, talking the language of the people who use TikTok. Because I would say, and prove me if I'm wrong, I might just feel that way, that TikTok is mainly used by Gen Z people. And it is a great opportunity how to educate about gambling. I'm going to ask you about the possibly, some might say that when you talk about gambling in a social media like that, TikTok, even though that you would talk about the things, how gambling works, what does it make to your brain? Some might say that it will fall into the category of promoting gambling. I have my own perception of that. I mean, my own opinion about it, but I'm curious about yours. How would you reply to that?
Well, I'm a fairly transparent person.
Mm-hmm.
I think people have to be fully educated, and I think people want to be educated. If you want to start burning books or hiding books or doing any of those things, you go right ahead.
Yeah.
But I'm not going to do that. So again, that is your opinion, but there is no data on that says suppressing information from people is a good thing.
Yeah, exactly. And especially, again, it's an opinion or a feeling, but I feel like it's quite obvious. And you could, it's not a subjective feeling that I have, but the fact is that gambling is jumping on you from almost every corner. You have it on social media, you have it on streaming platforms, you have it on crypto community platforms that are basically based on people's interests.
Correct.
So it's almost impossible to be hidden from gambling.
Yes.
So making a content which is going to be opposing all of that content which is out there about, let's make a bet, let's have some fun, which is going to be about the real things that are happening. Things like you are going to be losing with gambling. The only time when you are winning with gambling is when you are lucky. So you should just enjoy the thrill of the game, lucky feeling and stuff, but you should be aware about the risks which are part of it. And I feel like the more examples of that working is going to be out there, it more normalized is it going to be. There is actually a study which is from Australia, I believe, and the study says about the accumulated harm of low risk and medium risk players is much higher than the harms which high risk players are experiencing. So you can fairly say that there is some amount of harm in many gambling occasions. You can even compare it to the basic spending habits. So perhaps, I bought 2 pairs of shoes instead of 1, or, let's say whatever, shirt, something. And you could feel a little harm from it. Like,
sure.
Okay, maybe I shouldn't have done it, but it's all right. I'm going to not do it for next time. And I feel like it could apply to gambling as well. And if you somehow normalize the harm in gambling in the eyes of the people, it would become, be cautious about it, would become a natural part of their approach. So I'm really happy for the work that you are doing. I think it has the potential to move the needle of what currently is perceived as responsible gambling, or basically taking care of your gambling. Is there anything else that you would like to mention? Some message for the industry, stakeholders, policymakers?
I think for everyone, we have to look at building what was once known as responsible gaming, which we want to think about it as sustainable play, positive play well, any of the words you want, into the customer journey. And I think the more you begin to look at different ways of measuring it, for example, we measure it through a marketing score, net promoter score, which increases trust. If you look at it as a percentage of your crisis issues management budget, if your percentage of your PR budget, of your percentage of your marketing budget, stop pigeonholing it into this place where you say, oh, I'm forced to do this, because this is an amazingly powerful tool. And there'll be other people coming up with better ideas or working and doing. And these are the things that we should start looking at to create a sustainable game in a very regulated world. And the more AI we get, the more it's going to be easy to regulate. So the more you're going to have to be on your toes.
I think that we couldn't end up with a better message. Thank you very much for the time to be here for the discussion. I really enjoyed it. I hope that our listeners and viewers enjoyed it as well. And thank you very much. It was great.
Thank you for